In the quiet stretch of northeastern countryside known for its rolling hills, vibrant maple forests, and slow-moving creeks that shimmered under the spring sun, there existed a neighborhood named Brookside Hollow, a residential haven designed for upper-middle-class tranquility where children rode their bikes in tight loops around cul-de-sacs and neighbors shared gossip over white fences. At the far edge of this picturesque community where the pine trees thickened and the terrain dipped into a wide ravine, stood the home of Daniel Reeves, a man who stood as a quiet anomaly among his neighbors. A retired civil engineer with over 40 years of experience in hydrology and water infrastructure, Daniel had moved to Brookside Hollow not for community engagement or front porch politics but for peace, privacy, and the satisfaction of cultivating a small patch of nature with the care of a man who understood its power. His 12-acre property included a winding creek that, during heavy rains, could swell into a surging torrent, carving paths through soft earth, toppling small trees, and threatening the property's downriver. Long before most residents had even moved into the newly developed subdivision, Daniel had studied the topography and weather data of the region, conducted soil analyses, and determined that a modest, strategically placed earthen dam could prevent future flooding disasters. With permits from the county and the cooperation of local environmental authorities, he built it himself. A project that took the better part of a year and stood not as an eyesore or an obstruction but a carefully engineered structure that diverted overflow into a reinforced drainage basin and ultimately protected the lower-lying homes from the region's infamous spring floods. For over a decade, the dam functioned without complaint or failure. It absorbed the heavy rains during 5-year storms, withstood back-to-back wet seasons, and kept the community's storm drains from being overwhelmed. Daniel received the occasional nod of thanks or passing compliment from residents who had read the community newsletter blurb written by the former HOA president, a mild-mannered schoolteacher named Mr. Kaufman, who once referred to Daniel as Brookside Hollow's unsung steward of safety. But time marched on, and as new families moved in and old leadership cycled out, the culture of the neighborhood began to change. Young professionals and ambitious real estate flippers started buying up homes and lobbying for cosmetic changes to the neighborhood's aesthetic, flowerbed regulations, mailbox uniformity, community gate installation. Amid this shift, the HOA elected a new president, Linda Carver, a sharply dressed, ambitious woman in her late 40s who had relocated from an urban suburb and brought with her the belief that a pristine appearance and strict rules created property value. Linda didn't understand dams, nor did she care to. What she saw was a large mound of earth reinforced with unsightly concrete spillways and rusting grates located inconveniently near one of the planned expansions for the neighborhood's walking trail system. At her first board meeting as HOA president, she called it a potential liability and ordered a review. The review, conducted by a junior inspector with no hydrology background, declared the dam to be an unregistered modification to the community's natural space, and Linda seized on this finding as justification for removal. Daniel was stunned. He attended the next HOA meeting armed with documentation, county permits, stamped engineering diagrams, rainfall mitigation charts, and a photo slideshow demonstrating how the dam had prevented erosion during the 2009 and 2013 heavy rain events that had flooded nearby towns. He explained in calm, clear terms the function of the dam, how its strategic overflow channels had diverted water away from lower elevations, how its base was secured with riprap stone to prevent washout, and how removing it could increase flood risk exponentially. But his words fell on indifferent ears. Linda dismissed his evidence as dated and overly technical, accusing Daniel of playing engineer in his backyard. She insisted that aesthetics mattered and that Daniel's structure violated the newly updated HOA Landscape Harmony Clause, a clause that had been quietly amended during a closed-door board session just months before. As Daniel's voice rose in protest, demanding to know why none of this had been brought before the community for vote, Linda smiled and replied, "You're just one man. We represent the collective." What followed was a slow-rolling legal and social campaign of pressure. First came the warning letters, then the $50 a day fines for noncompliance, then the announcement in the HOA newsletter labeling Daniel's dam a non-compliant obstruction. Neighbors began to avoid him. Children no longer cut through his property on their way to the creek. A particularly smug neighbor, Jeff Stanton, who had once thanked Daniel after his basement remained dry during a historic rainfall, now joked loudly that the Beaver Dam's days were numbered. Daniel appealed to the county, only to discover that due to redistricting and a backlog of environmental filings, his original permits had lapsed into administrative limbo, giving the HOA a legal foothold to claim nonconformance. By late summer, the HOA sent a demolition order along with notice that a contractor, paid for with HOA reserve funds, would be arriving to reclaim and restore the green space by early fall. Daniel stood by helplessly as bulldozers and backhoes tore into the dam, cracking through the hardened clay and concrete spillways he had so carefully reinforced, scattering riprap into the streambed like discarded gravel. Workers yanked out the drainage pipes, filled the retention basin with loose earth, and regrade the terrain into a gentle slope seeded with grass. Linda arrived on site in a sun hat and sunglasses to supervise, clapping politely as if attending a ribbon cutting. "Progress," she declared. "And now we can all enjoy a natural landscape again." Daniel stood at the edge of his property, fists clenched, watching years of his work and a critical safeguard vanish under the pretense of beautification. His throat burned with fury, but more than anger, he felt fear. Not for himself, but for the homes that now lay vulnerable down the slope, for the culverts that would now receive unrestrained surge water, for the families too oblivious to understand the protective role that dam had played. That evening, as the machinery drove off and the sun dipped below the treetops, Daniel walked the remnants of the ravine. He knelt and touched the exposed soil where his control valve had once been, feeling the dampness beneath, already soft from unseasonal drizzle. He looked up at the sky, gauging the thickness of the clouds that lingered on the western horizon, already heavy with the scent of moisture. He whispered to himself, "This dam protected everyone. You won't see the damage until the rains return." But by then, no one would remember. The warnings he sent to the HOA inbox went unanswered. When he posted a final plea on the Brookside Hollow forum outlining the risk analysis, Linda responded with a brief message. "Enough with the fearmongering. This matter is settled. Enjoy your retirement." Daniel closed his laptop and went to bed in silence. Outside, the clouds gathered, slow and pregnant with promise, and deep underground, the water remembered the path it had once been denied. Fall arrived in Brookside Hollow with deceptive gentleness, painting the trees in crimson and amber as if to mask the silent shifts taking place beneath the earth and above the skies. The sun filtered softly through thinning canopies, and the families of the neighborhood went about their routines, unaware or perhaps willfully ignorant of the price they had paid for a cleaner view. After the dam's destruction, Linda Carver and her allies in the HOA moved swiftly to consolidate their image of victory. The area where the dam once stood had been landscaped into a community green space, complete with ornamental shrubs and a few recycled benches, perfect for joggers and dog walkers. A professional photographer was hired to take staged shots of the new area, which Linda then posted on the community's website and social media pages, crowing triumphantly under captions like "Restored to Nature" and "No More Muddy Monstrosity." She even floated the idea of hosting a spring Brookside picnic on the site, complete with local food trucks, assuming of course that the grass would hold up come March. Meanwhile, Daniel Reeves watched from the quiet solitude of his home, retreating further into isolation as the air around him thickened with dismissal and derision. He was now that guy, the cranky old man who clung to his dam like a relic of paranoia. But what the others didn't know or chose to forget was that Daniel didn't act out of fear or nostalgia. He acted out of knowledge. He knew the weight of water. He had seen it climb concrete embankments and topple steel gates, had watched with his own eyes as a 20-year-old levee burst along the Mississippi in 1993, sending 1 million gallons an hour into a helpless subdivision. He remembered the screams, the submerged rooftops, the days it took for helicopters to retrieve stranded families from second-story balconies. Water, he knew, didn't negotiate with optimism or HOA policies. So, while the rest of Brookside Hollow prepared for the holidays and admired the new seasonal signage Linda had installed at the neighborhood's front gate, Daniel spent his time reinforcing his own property in silence. He rerouted the natural contours of his land into a set of small trenches and diversion channels, using sandbags, culvert tubing, and heavy gravel to direct potential overflow away from his foundation. He rebuilt a scaled-down version of the original retention basin, camouflaged behind a border of hedges so it wouldn't draw attention. He updated his floodplain models daily, inputting barometric data from a personal weather station mounted on his roof. His neighbors scoffed. Jeff Stanton, who lived 4 houses down the slope, joked during a wine night that Dan's probably got a submarine in his garage. Laughter followed, and no one asked how Daniel was or what he might know that they didn't. But the sky began to change. By mid-November, the region experienced its first warning signs: unseasonably warm air lingering far too late, heavy dew each morning, and then a wave of low-pressure systems crawling in from the Pacific, dragging with them record-high moisture content. The meteorologists began issuing cautious bulletins about atmospheric rivers forming offshore. They used words like unprecedented and cumulative saturation, and the local nightly news began ending broadcasts with, "Be weather aware this winter." Still, Linda remained unfazed. In fact, on the night of the second major rain advisory, she boarded a flight to Aruba for a long-anticipated vacation with her boyfriend. She left behind an auto-reply email, a backup HOA contact named Sheila who knew less than nothing about infrastructure, and a neighborhood utterly unprepared. As December began, the first rain hit. It was a soft drizzle at first, steady but manageable. Then it grew, feeding off warm ocean air and colliding with frigid northern fronts. Within 3 days, the soil across Brookside Hollow had absorbed all it could, and the rest began to pool. Water slithered down gutters and driveways, seeking its ancient paths that Daniel's dam had once restrained. The small creek behind where the dam used to stand filled almost overnight, swelling with runoff from the surrounding hills and the roads above. There were no longer any spillways to direct it. Without the diversion trench, water rushed downhill, following gravity toward the subdivision. Daniel, observing the changes from his monitors and walking his perimeter at dawn and dusk, tried one last time to sound the alarm. He printed out flyers with diagrams and warnings and placed them in the mailboxes of the 25 homes most at risk. Most were ignored. A few were laughed at. One family, the Burtons, called him paranoid and accused him of trying to scare their children. Even Sheila, the interim HOA contact, told him via email the area is perfectly safe. Our landscapers confirmed everything is up to standard. Daniel deleted the message and closed his laptop, focusing instead on shoring up the edges of his containment trench. The next storm hit harder. Sheets of rain battered the roofs and tore leaves from trees. Storm drains across the neighborhood clogged with leaves and mulch, sending rivulets of water back towards sidewalks and garages. Children stared out windows in awe as streets transformed into streams. Basements began to dampen. Some pumps failed. On the 3rd day of the storm, the creek behind the former dam overflowed. Without a retention barrier, it surged freely across the old ravine, barreled through the landscaped grass slope, and crashed through the first backyard it met, Jeff Stanton's. Water slammed against his patio, knocked down his decorative retaining wall, and poured through a ground-level window with unstoppable force. Within minutes, Jeff's newly renovated basement was a waist-deep pool. He screamed into the phone trying to reach emergency services, but they were already overwhelmed. As dusk fell, 5 more houses downstream began reporting flooding. Some families attempted to build makeshift barricades with trash bags and plastic tarps. Others tried to evacuate only to find their driveways already submerged. Meanwhile, Daniel's home remained dry, a solitary island in the growing floodplain, his diversion channels working exactly as designed. He watched from his upstairs window as dark water snaked across his neighbors' lawns and swallowed their solar lights one by one. Overhead, lightning cracked open the sky and illuminated the chaos below, a neighborhood at the mercy of water it had once claimed to control. The HOA clubhouse, recently renovated with granite countertops and a fitness center, now had water creeping up its foundation. Ironically, the same community trail that had replaced the dam served as a funnel, accelerating the flow directly into the subdivision's lowest quadrant. Power flickered. Trees fell. Somewhere in the distance, a transformer exploded in a blue-green bloom. The night was long, filled with panicked voices and the sound of sirens that never quite arrived. Those who could escape did so with what they could carry. Those who stayed behind climbed to upper floors and prayed the water would stop. Didn't. At 3:12 a.m., the main stormwater culvert near the entrance of Brookside Hollow collapsed under pressure, sending an uncontainable wave into the streets, finishing what nature had started. By dawn, 38 homes were damaged, 15 uninhabitable, and 8 declared total losses. The new community green space was gone, replaced by a ravine twice as wide as the one Daniels Dam had once contained. Mud and debris blanketed the roads. Vehicles floated at odd angles. The air smelled of sewage and pine. Linda, still sipping cocktails on a beach, awoke to hundreds of messages and voicemails. Her phone died trying to sync them all. When she finally got through to Sheila, the news was nearly incoherent. It's gone, everything's gone. Jeff's house, the clubhouse, everything. Linda, we need FEMA. We need the National Guard. As helicopters circled and news vans parked at the subdivision's ruined entrance, reporters began asking the inevitable question. How did this happen in a modern neighborhood? And one name kept surfacing, Daniel Reeves. Some residents, dazed and soaked, told the reporters about the guy who warned us, the man who built the dam, the one who said this would happen. By noon, Daniel's doorstep was swarming with media, but he gave only one brief statement to the cameras. I built that dam to protect us. They tore it down. Nature doesn't negotiate. Then he closed the door and sat quietly in the dark, listening to the distant sound of helicopters and the closer, steadier sound of water still dripping into the streets of a community that had chosen to ignore the one man who tried to save it. The sun broke over the shattered remnants of Brookside Hollow with a cruel indifference, casting golden rays on muddy streets, drowned vehicles, toppled fences, and the bloated silence of ruined lives. In the cruel clarity of daylight, the neighborhood that had once boasted of manicured lawns, landscaped medians, and strict HOA-enforced aesthetics now resembled a disaster zone. Ironically, because that was what it had become. Families wandered the streets with numb expressions, their belongings sodden and strewn across yards. Refrigerators lay on their sides like gutted whales. Family photo albums fluttered on chain-link fences. Children's toys floated lazily in puddles that had no business being where they were. Emergency vehicles finally began trickling in, now that the worst of the storm had passed, but the damage was done. The water had written its story across every drywall seam and basement wall, and the heart of the disaster sat like a gaping wound in the middle of the community. The gully where Daniel Reeves's dam had once stood. FEMA representatives arrived with clipboards and hardened faces. Insurance adjusters followed, along with county engineers who surveyed the devastation with furrowed brows and muttered consultations. And at the center of the attention, spinning like a top that had lost its axis, was Linda Carver, returned prematurely from her Caribbean vacation and trying desperately to control a narrative that had already slipped far beyond her reach. Her first instinct was to deflect. This was an unprecedented storm, she told a growing crowd of reporters, community members, and county officials gathered in front of the waterlogged clubhouse. No one could have seen this coming. But her words fell flat, not because they were inaccurate, though many suspected they were, but because too many people had seen this coming, most notably the one man she had ignored, mocked, and steamrolled in the months leading up to the catastrophe. Daniel Reeves became an unintentional symbol, not because he wanted to be, but because people now needed someone to cling to, someone to explain what had happened, and more importantly, someone who had warned them. Interviews from neighbors surfaced, conversations recorded on doorbell cams, copies of his flyer with red-letter warnings scrawled in Sharpie. They destroyed a dam. One mother of 3 told the news while standing in front of her water-drenched garage. And now we're swimming in the results. Linda's composure cracked within 2 days. She avoided Daniel entirely, though she issued a public apology that reeked of legal drafting and included vague references to miscommunication and unexpected engineering challenges. She blamed the landscapers for the slope failure. She blamed the county for not issuing stronger rain alerts. She blamed Daniel, absurdly, for not officially filing a safety complaint when he believed the neighborhood was at risk. The more she talked, the worse it got. Social media lit up with drone footage of the flood path, carefully annotated by amateur sleuths who drew glowing overlays comparing the pre-flood water retention system to the flattened green space that replaced it. Thousands of angry comments poured into Brookside Hollow's HOA page demanding accountability. A local environmental engineer named Carson Wu posted a TikTok that went viral, breaking down in simple terms how the dam had helped regulate not just water flow but downstream soil erosion, overflow mitigation, and slope protection. Functions now utterly destroyed. This was negligence, he said plainly. This isn't just rain. This was man-made failure. The county opened an official investigation. Linda, now in panic mode, scrambled to form a damage control subcommittee of the HOA, never mind that most of its board members had either resigned or left town to stay with unaffected relatives. Those who remained began to speak out. Sheila, once her staunchest supporter, confessed during a recorded HOA meeting that she had never really understood what the dam did and just followed Linda's lead. She burst into tears halfway through and had to be escorted out. Meanwhile, Daniel Reeves kept to himself. He made no speeches, filed no lawsuits, and issued no triumphant statements. He simply resumed life as best he could, cleaning mud from the edges of his trenches, repairing what little erosion had touched his property, and offering quiet assistance to the neighbors who now approached him with hesitant gratitude. A few brought baked goods. One man, eyes wet with guilt, simply placed a handwritten note that read, "I'm sorry," on Daniel's porch and walked away. The irony was not lost on Daniel, but he did not revel in it. He had wanted to protect the community, not watch it fall apart. Still, the reckoning had begun. He had wanted to protect the community, not watch it fall apart. Still, the reckoning had begun. The HOA's insurance provider issued a statement indicating that the policy did not cover deliberate structural removal resulting in neighborhood-wide property damage, which sparked another firestorm. Lawsuits began to fly from homeowners against the HOA, from the HOA against the landscaping firm, from the landscaping firm against the contractor who graded the slope, and eventually, from a collection of residents against Linda Carver personally. She was served with papers during a frantic HOA meeting, and cameras caught the moment her hand froze mid-gesture as the legal envelope was placed in it. Word spread that she had mortgaged her home the following week and hired a crisis manager who promptly advised her to step down as HOA president for health reasons. Her resignation letter, posted online and printed on HOA letterhead, ran for 4 paragraphs and managed to apologize without taking responsibility, thank the community while implying they'd failed her, and end with a quote from a motivational speaker no one recognized. She left town within the month. But the scars remained. Rebuilding began slowly. FEMA declared Brookside Hollow a federal disaster zone, unlocking emergency funds and triggering property reassessments that sent homeowners into a fresh panic. Real estate values cratered. Several families moved out altogether, unable or unwilling to remain in a neighborhood now associated with reckless mismanagement and viral shame. The entrance sign to the subdivision, once flanked by perfectly trimmed boxwoods, now leaned slightly to the left, mud-stained and missing 2 letters. Someone spray-painted over it, HOA equals hell. No one bothered to remove it. The county, now deeply involved, began requiring all HOAs within the region to undergo mandatory third-party engineering reviews before altering water infrastructure. Daniel, invited to serve as a consultant on the task force, declined. He preferred the quiet of his own land, the whisper of trees, the rhythm of repairs. But he did agree to speak at one town hall meeting, not to scold, not to gloat, but to explain. He brought with him photographs from before the dam was built, rainfall data from the last 20 years, topographic overlays, and a single laminated poster titled, "How Water Remembers." He spoke for 20 minutes. The room was silent throughout. At the end, a young woman raised her hand and asked what advice he would give other communities. Daniel paused, looked down for a moment, then answered, "Don't fight nature. Learn from it. Respect it. And don't let pride drown reason." That quote made the rounds, etched into the memory of a town that had nearly lost everything over aesthetics and arrogance. As spring approached and fresh grass began to grow across the ravaged land, efforts to restore the natural retention basin gained traction. The county approved a new community dam, publicly funded, professionally engineered, and designed with Daniel's original model as its foundation. This time, no one opposed it. The project was named Hollow's Resilience. A bronze plaque was installed at its entrance, listing the date of the flood, the number of homes lost, and a final line that read, "Let this place remember what happens when warnings are silenced and water is ignored." Daniel never visited the plaque, though he appreciated its message. He stayed home, where birds returned to perch on fence posts, where rabbits once again darted through brush that now concealed new berms and runoff channels. And at night, when it rained again, because it always would, he listened not with fear, but with the calm confidence of a man who understood that true safety isn't built on rules or appearances, but on preparation, humility, and the unshakable memory of water. Years passed, and the story of Brookside Hollow gradually transitioned from viral headline to case study. From whispered scandal to a transformative parable taught in city planning classrooms and environmental law seminars across the country. its name evoked with equal parts embarrassment and wisdom. The flood had done more than damage property. It had unearthed an entire ecosystem of negligence, arrogance, and misplaced priorities that once governed countless HOA-run communities. And in its aftermath, governments and private neighborhoods alike began to reassess their roles in managing the land they so confidently built upon. Brookside Hollow, the once pristine suburb now rebuilt with mud-washed sidewalks and replanted trees, didn't just survive its collapse. It evolved. Gone were the days of cookie-cutter rules about mailbox colors and pet leash lengths. In their place came community resilience training, soil science workshops, and monthly town halls where even the quietest voices were heard with reverence. The dam, or rather its modern successor, Hollow's resilience, became not only a physical barrier but a symbol of unity, a communal promise carved in stone and concrete that no single person's opinion would ever again override the wisdom of environmental knowledge. Children who had once known nothing but manicured lawns now planted native grasses and trees alongside restoration volunteers. The hollow behind Daniel Reeves's property, once quietly guarded and then violently erased, was reborn as a shared watershed sanctuary, open to all and protected by new regulations that required joint oversight from residents, engineers, and local ecologists. Daniel himself, though never one for the spotlight, slowly became an unofficial steward of the land. His gray hair thickened with age, his hands roughened more with time, but his mind remained sharp and tethered to the rhythms of nature he had always trusted more than paperwork and committees. People came to him often now not as adversaries but as learners. Teenagers building science projects, homeowners wondering how to build a retention garden, architects curious about topography's role in urban expansion all found their way to his porch where he welcomed them with quiet nods and answered questions without judgment. The bitterness that once filled his chest had been replaced by a somber peace, not forgiveness, exactly, but a recognition that anger was a fire best used to light the path ahead, not burn the bridges behind. He even attended one of the HOA's new open invitation community cookouts held annually on the anniversary of the flood, not as a celebration but as a solemn remembrance and recommitment. At this particular gathering, on the 5th anniversary of the disaster, a crowd of over 200 gathered under string lights and restored gazebos, with tables laden with dishes from every kitchen in the neighborhood. No longer did HOA leaders patrol the party with clipboards. Instead, a rotating committee called the Commons Council, made up of volunteers who changed every 6 months, helped organize and mediate issues as they arose with transparency, humility, and a commitment to never repeat the mistakes of the past. That night, under a clear sky that seemed a quiet gift after so many years of turbulent clouds, Daniel stood near the edge of the new dam and looked across the water. He thought about Linda Carver, who had long since vanished from public life. Last anyone had heard, she moved to a coastal town where she started a real estate blog and kept a low profile. She had never returned, never written, never apologized again, but Daniel didn't need her to. The system that allowed her decisions had been dismantled, and that was enough. He thought about the people who had stayed, Sheila, who now ran a native pollinator garden, Greg, who'd become a certified rainwater technician, Maria, who used to glare at Daniel from her porch, now waving warmly whenever their paths crossed. And he thought about the dam. Its past form, its destruction, and now its rebirth as a place of education and remembrance. It had been named Hollow's Resilience by a unanimous vote, and etched on its edge in a steel plaque were the names of every family that had lived through the flood, with a final line that read, "We rebuilt, not what we had, but what we needed." That plaque became a place where children laid flowers, where teens took selfies during cleanup drives, and where every new resident was brought on their first week in the neighborhood. Not as a warning, but as a story. Because Brookside Hollow no longer erased its mistakes. It honored them, learned from them, and passed them on. Local universities began bringing students to tour the dam and surrounding green spaces, taught by rotating speakers including ecologists, civil engineers, and even former homeowners. One such tour was led by a young woman named Lena, who had been a child during the flood and now studied environmental science at the State University. She recalled the night the water rushed into her room, how her father had carried her to the attic, how they'd been rescued by boat. She spoke with poise and fire in her voice, and when someone asked what inspired her path, she simply turned and pointed to the rebuilt dam. "Because someone tried to silence nature," she said, "and I want to make sure we never do that again." The crowd nodded, and someone took a photo that later ended up on a national magazine's feature on grassroots climate resilience. The headline read, "Where HOA once ruled, harmony now grows." Elsewhere across the country, other neighborhoods followed Brookside's blueprint, hosting water retention audits, replacing strict HOA codes with democratic charters, funding green infrastructure through small levies approved by actual resident votes. Some even invited Daniel to visit and consult, though he rarely accepted, preferring his time spent among the trees and wetlands he helped preserve.